Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to have you here. I am going ahead and get our program started for today. So, my name is Summer Jackson, and I am the managing director of this great affinity group. And for those of you who are guests to BFN, this is a regional affinity group with the mission to help Black philanthropic professionals to connect, re energize, and align to best support Black communities and organizations. Our program today will center around one of our four priority areas, which is to create safe space and supportive Black positive spaces for Black professionals. We seek to support Black professionals to enter the field of philanthropy and to advance into leadership positions. We also seek to serve as advocates to Black communities in philanthropy. And lastly, we seek to align Black funders and allies to maximize resources to Black-led organizations. And that's what brings us here today. We're excited to host this program to commemorate the 11th anniversary of Black Philanthropy Month and the third anniversary of our network in the Bay Area. This program is important because since we began, the landscape and expectations for our communities and profession has changed dramatically. The space is for us to check in and discuss how things are going and how we can leverage strategies to best support our communities and to make connections. So we are excited to have you here. Before we begin, I just want to bring greetings to our members and allies, but I also want to give a few housekeeping rules for this virtual space. This meeting will be recorded and shared with our network members and attendees. I would love for you to introduce yourself and by putting your name, pronoun, and affiliation in the chat. And then we also ask that you keep yourself on mute and add questions to the chat box for the formal Q&A portion of the meeting. So I have the honor of introducing our esteemed moderator for today, Charles Fields. Charles has more than a decade of leadership experience in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. Originally, he is from St. Louis, Missouri. He moved to the Bay Area to offer his time and talent through volunteering, and then he fell in love with California and moved away from snowy winters. His career has led him to be a leader in very notable foundations such as the San Francisco Foundation, the Marguerite Casey Foundation, the California Endowment, and most recently, he is the VP of Program Implementation at the James Irvine Foundation. Charles is an avid runner with a warm spirit and infectious smile, and he had graciously accepted my invitation to host this panel. And I am so grateful. Charles, I hand it over to you to host this conversation. Thank you.
A very kind introduction. I'm going to say a few words, and then I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to read some of their bios, so you'll hear me reading because I want folks to know how, if I'm esteemed, they're super esteemed. So I want folks to know how good they are, and then I'll ask them their first question. It's funny to me whenever you're being introduced and they say all your jobs, and I've worked, this is my fourth foundation. It almost makes me feel like I can't keep a philanthropic job because I've worked at 4 foundations. So either I'm really experienced or I can't keep a job. So whichever, but it is great to see everybody. It's great to be with the network again. This is my second time with this group in a more formal capacity. But you know, as Summer said, I've worked in philanthropy 20 years, which is crazy to me when it was very accidental that I got in. And I have had some opportunity to see the different kind of fads that go through philanthropy. And philanthropy is, to me, kind of, and I say this with a lot of love, like a puppy chasing a ball. Like the ball will go over there and then philanthropy will run over there. And then the ball will go over there and philanthropy will go over there. And the ball will go over there and philanthropy will go over there. Philanthropy's attention span tends to be relatively short. And it is, that to me, I feel like has done a disservice to a lot of the really important issues that that philanthropy needs to be engaged in, especially issues that are focused on Black communities and justice for Black people. And so when the pandemic hit and the international racial reckoning happening, and there was a very strong response, not just by philanthropy, but by other sectors, to really focus on supporting social justice efforts, racial justice efforts, efforts to combat anti-Black racism. I was excited. And there were, as we know, all sorts of pledges that went out. But I also had a little bit of fear, because I was like, oh, is this just going to be one of those things? It's going to be like a year? Is this going to be 18 months? Like in 2 years, are we just going to be on to the next thing? And I think that question is still there, like, to be honest. I don't really know if this is kind of our long-term posture as philanthropy, centering Blackness as a way of working for our foundations that have chosen to do so. I don't know that. I think there have been some positive trends. And then I think there have been kind of the trends you'd expect, where it was really just about getting a press release out to be able to say you were doing something, but nothing underneath that. I think we have a little bit of both. And I hope to hear from folks on this call about what their foundations are doing, if they've been able to live up to their commitment or not. But today, we're going to talk about the importance of centering Blackness in our work. And we have two, as I said, extremely esteemed panelists. So let me read a little bit about them, tell you a little bit about them and their bios, and then I'm going to ask them a question. So we'll start with E. Bomani Johnson. He's the Vice President of External Partnerships at the Mariah Group. He also serves as the Associate Director of Forward Promise. He co-designed a multi-million-dollar grant-making process for the Momentum Fund of the United Philanthropy Forum of Greater Atlanta COVID and the Greater Atlanta COVID-19 Response and Recovery Fund. He's founded Emergent Pathways, a management consulting firm that builds and implements strategies for racial equity, gender equity, and social justice. And he's also served as a Senior Director of Programs and Partnerships for the DC Trust and the Greater Washington Community Foundation. He's a member of RISE, a center in Richmond, and a trainer for Association for Black Foundation Executives. I'm gonna give applause for Bomani. A lot of people off camera, so you can applause in your off camera-ness. He is just a really skilled leader and facilitator. I've had the privilege of working with Bomani in several areas, and I've always left smarter and better because of it, and I know folks will today. And our next panelist, Alexandra Bastine. She is co-founder and co-director at the Imperative Fund. She has spent her entire career working for gender, racial, and economic justice. She worked at Silicon Valley Community Foundation, really leading the financial stability grant making there. She was also a senior associate at PolicyLink, where she led a variety of projects focused on advancing economic opportunity, including federal tax policy, workforce and employment policy, addressing government issues, fines and fees. She's also the co-executive director of Young Black Women's Society, and both has a number of academic degrees and was a Connecting Leaders Fellow with the Association for Black Foundation Executives, as I was. And as Bomani was, actually. I think we're all like APFE fellows. Two out of the three of us really went on to do something, and the other one just moves from foundation to foundation to get a better job. But with that, we just have great panelists, and I'm so excited. So I'm going to first ask Bomani, and then I'll ask Alexandra. Bomani, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about the Nafasi Fund, why you started it, and kind of what is the niche or the gap you really hope it fills.
Sure. First, I wanted to say thanks to Summer and thanks to the team at the Black Funders Network there in the Bay Area for inviting me and to share about Nafasi. and also to learn from all of you about how we can do this work and do it better. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, and in one of those spaces, and I'm sure a lot of our stories can, there's some similarities there. I grew up with a group of people who were like 2 or 3 years older than me. It was about 38 of us. I just turned 51 in July. And thinking about like that age group, growing up in the late 70s and the 80s and the 90s in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, when things were shifting in a lot of ways, there were, when I did a count, there were 7 of us who made it to this kind of stage in our life where we haven't been either had long bouts of drug use and abuse, that we hadn't been engaged with the criminal legal system in a lot of ways that nobody wants to be engaged with, or that are simply alive at this point. And that's not because of anything that we did to ourselves. That's because of a lot of the things that all of us work on and the ways that we do our work. And so recognizing that, it was easy for me to, I won't say easy, but it's easier for me, I think, to tell the story about my progression from this little boy who had these aspirations of being this big time corporate lawyer to somebody who has decided to run a new fiscal sponsor that supports Black-led organizations. Yeah, so Nafasi is actually the result in many ways of what was happening in 2020. In many ways it's that, but it's also many ways in what has happened to us for the centuries that we have been engaged here as people, as Black folks in this thing called America. And the short story of it is I was actually on the phone with another CLFP alum from the first class, Toya Randall, in August of 2020. And we were just catching up and talking about a number of things. Eventually we started talking about work because we both work in and connected to this field. And we were talking about, like you mentioned, Charles, all these promises that were being made by these entities, by foundations, even by some governments and corporations about what they were going to do for Black folks. And we were talking about how, what that was going to boil down to is, sure, there'll be some that keep the commitment. There'll be a whole bunch that won't. And then even of those that actually do keep the commitment, like what's the extra burden that's going to place on Black folks leading organizations that serve Black communities? And we talked about how the field of fiscal sponsorship is something that is hit or miss. And oftentimes it's a miss. It's a hit in that, of course, you get with these entities and they can help you to accept grants. So they can accept grants and they can re-grant to you, or they can actually help you to manage your finances for certain things if that's what your organization needs. The miss is that it actually is almost a full-time job to manage your relationship there. They are not run by people who understand or care to understand about the situations that Black communities and Black organizations find themselves in. And so they don't respond, or they're not responsive in ways that are helpful to us, and they often become burdens to us. Not to mention that it costs a lot. On the low end, you find something that's like 9 or 8 or 9%. On the high end, we've seen things as high as 12 to 15%. And sometimes that's not to do anything except to re-grant money. And so we said, how do we create something that is about us, that really speaks to who we are, that speaks to our needs, that speaks to our ability to not just do work in our communities, but also to build community as we do work, in a sense, right? And so that's how Nafasi came to be. And we kind of look at our work in 3 buckets, which is one is, providing the fiscal sponsorship that anybody needs and deserves, everything that any comprehensive fiscal sponsor would provide, everything from, like I mentioned, re-granting to actually housing and holding the HR functions for organizations. The second thing that we do is we invest in our organizations. So that's the second part of our approach. And that looks at what can we provide in terms of technical assistance and capacity supports for our groups. We cap our fees at 5%, again, because we don't want to have them be burdened by somebody helping to manage their support. We want to partner with you and do the work that's necessary in your communities. And the third thing that we do is we invest in the people, because we also know that as Black folks doing any type of social change work, any type of racial justice work, any type of community change, this work can literally, it can kill us. It takes our lives. You know, I think about, and I often, because she was a great friend of mine, and also another CLFP alum, Allison Brown, who ran, in her last job, ran the Communities for Just School Fund, and literally worked herself to death, trying to make sure that she was doing all that she could to meet the needs of communities and make sure that the resources that she had access to got out to spaces that they need to. And that's the thing that drives us in this part of the work. And so we want to work with our partners to support them on their health and wellness journey, to help them to get started, to help accelerate it if they're already on it, by doing a few things. Again, providing these webinars around different types of healing and health modalities and wellness modalities that speak to us. Have an annual retreat that we're going to be kicking off in 2023, where we take 3 or 4 days and we just go spend some time and not over program ourselves, because, you know, we like to do that on retreats sometimes. And really look at how can we also use these platforms that we have access to hopefully maybe pool together funds so that we can provide a base level of healthcare for the folks who do the work of our partnering organizations. So I'll stop there.
Thank you for that, Armani. You know, I think the work around what I think is called kind of fiscal sponsorship, but that intermediary support for organizations is actually really critical. So nonprofits that just want to focus on moving forward the work and not having to figure out all the other pieces can really do that. And a lot of organizations take advantage in those spaces, as you say, charge high fees, not giving the right support, and just really aren't competent in being able to provide services to Black organizations in that way. And to have an organization that's primarily focused on Black organizations be able to provide those levels of support is extremely unique, but absolutely critical. So, Alexandra, tell us a little bit about Imperative Fund and why you started it. What has been your motivation and passion around it? What is it that you want us to know about the Imperative Fund?
Sure. So, hello, everyone. I'm just making sure I'm not on mute here. Thank you to the Black Funders Network of the Bay Area for having me. I'm not in the Bay anymore, but I did live in Oakland first for 7 years. Now I'm back on the East Coast. That's where they made me. So I'm originally from Boston. I'm actually from a city called Brockton, which is 20 minutes south of Boston. And that is very, very much a big part of what drove me in my career and led me to building the Imperative. So, you know, that city that I mentioned when I was growing up was almost exclusively Haitian and Cape Verdean immigrants. So it was a Black immigrant city. I'm Haitian. And everyone around me in my world, either you were speaking Haitian Creole, you were speaking Cape Verdean Creole. It was a working class Black moving city that every time, you know, I heard the external world talk about where I'm from, they said negative things. But what I saw was hardworking people. What I saw was people taking care of their families. And what I saw was people somehow always falling into the traps of government policy, of poor government policies, the traps of, you know, bad practices in the private sector, predatory lending. An example, my hometown was #1 in the foreclosure crisis during the Great Recession. And not anything to be proud of, but I think deeply about how during COVID, my hometown was #1 in COVID deaths. So here we are all these years apart and we're still #1 in the wrong things. And so the reason that impacted my career, my decision to create the Imperative is that, you know, I got suspicious. I said, somebody is out here trying to keep Black people from being well. And that led me on a career to pursue a policy degree. I ended up at PolicyLink, and then I ended up at the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And while I was at SVCF, COVID-19 took hold. And the other thing that happened while I was at SVCF is that I participated in the AppV Connecting Leadership Fellows Program. And that is where I met Ade Oguntoye, who is my co-founder. And our very first conversation was Like philanthropy is simply not doing right by Black folks. That was our very first conversation. And we made an agreement to follow up on that conversation. And we did every single week for a year. And the result of that was the creation of the Imperative. And the Imperative is a global fund dedicated to the wealth, health, and connectedness of Black people. And essentially what we are trying to do is create space for Black leaders to build the solutions that we need while including our global experience, because we are a global people. We are not a monolithic people, but we have a global experience. There is a reason why wherever you go in the world, you can pretty much pinpoint how Black people are being treated versus how others may be treated in that community, even on the continent of Africa, even in countries in the Caribbean that are Black led, even in Brazil, right? That we're facing the same essentially anti-Black racism, right? We're facing white supremacist structures, policies, a white supremacist society, right? A white supremacist economy, right? We are all entrapped in it wherever we are in the world. And I believe that there are great, beautiful, and important solutions in that particular demographic of Black folks who want to build from our global perspective. So our program areas are wealth, health, and connectedness, right? But we see them all as circular. And what we are doing is making grants to really innovative projects that center our well-being, that prioritize our well-being, right? So it's not just that, oh, Black folks should have dollars, right, for their organizations. We're saying not only should Black folks have dollars, they should have an abundance of dollars, they should have an abundance of resources, and they shouldn't have to do any other extra dance to receive those resources. Meaning, and when I say an extra dance, if I can be honest, I hope I can be honest here, right? When I say the extra dance is sometimes I think philanthropy, I think our broader sector will use racial equity as a way to avoid centering Blackness. They'll use the ideas of racial equity, right? Inclusion and diversity, those kind of easier parts of equity, right? They'll use that as a way to say, why only Black people? Why only Black people? And what we're not saying that only Black people will benefit. We're saying it's okay to center Black people in this design, because no matter what we do for Black people, everyone is going to benefit. That's always been the way that it works. So I'll stop there, and I can say a little bit more about our projects, or whatever the next questions are, Charles.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm actually going to stick with you because what you said at the end really follows to my next question, and then I'll ask you the same one, Bomani. What does it mean to center Blackness in your approach? I work at the Irvine Foundation, and there aren't enough Black people that work there, but there are some Black people that work there. But having Black people work at a place, does that mean you are centering Blackness, right? It is a part of centering Blackness, but it does not mean you are centering Blackness. And we have Black people who work at Irvine, but we are not centering Blackness. So how do you think about centering Blackness in your work and approach? What does that mean for you? And what are things that those of us who are trying to get to more of a centered Blackness place in our organizations we should be thinking about? And Bomani, I'm going to ask you that after Alexandra.
Yeah. So centering Blackness, I think for the Imperative, I think is centering our full experience as global people. To say that the information that an elder in Haiti has is information that a young sister in Chicago could benefit from, right? And we believe that if we just create the space, as much space as we possibly can, to allow for the wisdom of the elder in Haiti to get to the sister in Chicago, that we will change our communities and our society. I think the other aspect of centering Blackness, because the Imperative, we are dedicated to the wealth, health, and connectedness of Black people. That's our mission. We're always going to be about that. That is not a temporary, we're not changing our mission to climate change or any other type of issue, right? Like the issue is our well-being, and that will remain the issue. But one of the things that we are are deeply focused on at the imperative is healing, right? So we use a healing centered approach. When we engage in partnership with the funded partners that we're working with, we try to ask ourselves, how do we create something that will create opportunity and let us heal? Because Black people, we have a long history of trauma to heal from. We know that trauma can transfer across generations. And we're seeing it in the work, right? We had a Black Lives Matter movement, and I don't believe that it was only because of George Floyd or anything in that specific time frame. I think that is generations of young people crying out, of young Black people crying out and saying, we need change, things have to become better, right? And so we look for the opportunity to think creatively about not just, what is a cool project that is focused on Black people, but what is something that we can do that gives us the chance to heal. So I'll give a quick example of our of one of our projects, right? We recently put out an RFP. This is in the health space. We recently put out an RFP, which was a request for partnership. And it was to build a Black women's health network, an international Black women's health network. And we're still in process for that. We haven't selected our core partner yet. But the vision behind that is to create the space for Black women, not only to share best practices and information about about health, about healthcare, about developments in healthcare that are happening at the international level, right? But then at the same time, in the creation of this network, we'll be inherently creating space for Black women to take leadership on their health. And our goal is to simply create the space and allow our partners to grow it to where it belongs, right? So it's not just about the work that we need to do. Yes, we need to have a network that is focused on our health, that will share information and best practices and center our well-being. And the work in and of itself is potentially healing, right? And so those are the interesting aspects of the work that we really are looking to build. And we're doing this in our connectedness space, which is a language project. But again, we're looking for our healing through that. And then we have some other projects on the way. So
thank you for that. That was a great answer, both about the what and the how, and all those things matter, right? All those things matter. But Mani?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And Alexandra, thanks for your response. And a lot of what you said is why we focus on Blackness, is why we center Blackness in our work and how we do it. And I mean, I think that the easiest way to think about it is we put us at the center of our work. We before we did anything, we talked to folks, we talked to us about what are some things that we would need to see or we would like to see in a fiscal sponsor relationship. And so the ways that we are hiring staff, the ways that we are even sharing what resources we have and things that are available is really about, how Black folks want to do this, right? Like you heard me call our approach a culturally restorative approach. And that's because when we speak outside of our community, we can't use the language that we really want to. It's a pro-Black approach. It's about us. And the reasons that it is because it's what we need. One of the things that was really helpful, or not just one of the things, but one of the things that really resonated so far with what you said, Alexandra, about your work is that around the wealth and the health and the connectedness is that you see it as one. And that's how I think I've been lucky in some ways to see this work, is that regardless of the issue that we work on or how we approach what it is that we do, be it through a health lens or an education lens or housing or all the different ways that we really look to address really how white supremacy hits our lives, and not just how white supremacy hits our lives, but how it hits our lives and we find ways to grow, and we find ways to thrive within that. That's the crux for what drives Nefasi. I would say that the ways that we center Blackness is around, one is who we are. We are a bunch of Black folks. We were started by 2 Black women, and I just happened to be there as a Black guy who was dumb enough. Like I said, I was on a conversation with Toya, having a conversation with Toya, and I was crazy enough to send a text message to Dr. Rhonda Bryant. If anybody on the call, I know a few folks know Rhonda. I sent Rhonda a message on a Saturday afternoon in August, before I even worked for her, and said, "What do you think about this?" And we started going. And that's not just about how do we, just think about what Black women say and trust it and move on it. It's been the essence of how we actually survived everything. I mean, most of the things that we understand and know that may have male faces on it were driven by women, and that's how we center Blackness in our work. I hope to continue to be smart enough, or sometimes crazy enough, to do what they tell me to do, sometimes without question. Because as I go and we grow this organization, the things that they have put, the seeds that they have planted, the ideas that they have shared, along with a few things that I might want to do, is how we're growing. So on a more like direct note, I say a lot of our work is iterative in terms of our understanding. So when we first started and we selected Nafasi as the name of the organization, we did so because, number one, we wanted something that was African, that was rooted in our experience. So Nafasi is a Swahili word that really breaks down to opportunity and capacity and space. And that's how we want this work to be. We want to provide the space for us to be whole, to be who we are in ourselves, and to be able to show up in that in whatever iterations that we need to, as individuals, as organizations, as networks, and for Nafasi to be able to hold the infrastructure for that work to continue to grow. So that's what we look at when we talk about centering Blackness in this work. One of the things that I've started saying more recently, and again, because this is the iterative nature of this, because we're learning, is that we're growing Nafasi to be a fiscal home for Black-led organizations. And we know those concepts, home and fiscal management, sometimes can be almost oppositional to each other. But that's if we do it the ways that we've been shown that it needs to be done, just to meet, to check boxes and to make sure that we're meeting standards that have nothing to do with us. Because we're centering us, we can make a fiscal home. We can have a conversation with somebody about where their budget is and how much is and ain't there. And then also talk about how they feeling and talk about what's going on with them. And when their kids walk in, because we're on a Zoom, we can speak to them and they might be familiar with us because we've had that level of experience. Putting us at the center means that the relationships are the most important pieces to our work, not the transactions. The transactions are what get us into relationship with each other. And if we do it right, then we build on those relationships so that the transactions are just something that we do. And we can continue to, like I said, to build this partnership to make sure that these organizations and the Nafasi is being really responsive to the needs of Black people and Black communities.
Summer, our fearless leader, pre the session, asked for questions from folks who were attending, and we got a lot of really good ones. So I'm going to ask you one. I'm going to read it as is, and then I'll probably sort it a little bit. But the question is, what are some of the best practices on working with white allies who claim they understand and recognize their privilege? And so I guess a way I might think about that question is, a number of us work in Black-led, Black-serving, Black-focused, Black-centering organizations. Some of us work in organizations that are led by people who are not Black, who do not have a focus on Black, but do things that are supportive of Black communities. And there are all sorts of spaces in between. As I think about that question, it feels like a question about how do we think about working with others, whether they are inside our organization or out, who want to be allies, but who are not Black. And how do we negotiate that with our real trying to be specific around centering Blackness. So this one, I'll start with you, Bomani, and then I'll go to Alexandra.
Yeah, sure. Is like, yeah, how do we work with folks who aren't Black? I don't even want to say sometimes how do we work with folks who are Black around this work? Because I mean, I think it's three things. I was trained by a man who, Baba Hannibal or Freak, who named me also, who said that our word is our bond. We don't, as Black folks, we don't own or control anything of great significance that can really impact the lives of Black folks, you know, on a larger scale, maybe than just our family or maybe our immediate neighborhood or communities that we work in. So our word has to be our bond. And that's how I approach work with us and others is, you know, for me is, you know, one of the hard things to do, or I should say one of the easy things to do in this space is recognizing just how many needs that we have. It might be easy to say, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, we can do that, and be over-promising what it is that Nafasi is going to be able to accomplish at any point, let alone, you know, just thinking about 3 or 4 years down the line. And so one of the things that I have to really that really helps me to focus in that is making what we say or what I say be what it is that we do. So our allyship, our connection to each other has to be active. It has to be in the deeds that we do. And then that's also how we learn to trust each other. And you know, it's easy to build trust when it's like, hey, we're gonna make sure that we are supporting 5 organizations, and then we got 5 organizations on board, right? But if we say that we're gonna support 25, and we don't get to 25 as a number, then how we actually share, you know, what it is that we have and haven't done to make sure that we got there, and the openness and the challenges that we have around getting to 25 is also a way for us to build trust. It is for us to share and be, you know, we talk about transparency all the time and what it means to be transparent in this field. And oftentimes, you know, because of the positions that we may be in as Black folks in these institutions, even when we may be the CEO of the institutions, our want to be as transparent as we know our communities deserve and should be demanding is a challenge. But how we do that, how do we share exactly what it is that we are doing and what we can and can't do, and really be upfront and honest about that around, you know, really taking on this work around allyship and understanding. And that's what I understand that we need to do with others. Like, you know, I've been working in this field for a long time and been working period for a long time, and have, of course, you know, made promises that I haven't been able to keep, and also had tons of promises broken. It's also how you approach that. How do you deal with that challenge when you can't live up to what it is that you say that you're going to do? You know, oftentimes with white folks in this work, there's a lot of things that can come up, I think. And, you know, one of the things that I often try to look at with white folks in this work is that, yeah, there's several that are around us all the time, but I also want to know, what are they doing in their communities? What are they doing with other white folks? Who in your family are you talking to about these things that you espouse when you're with us? And that's cool. And I get that you might come to us and be like, hey, yo, I need a break because this is crazy, right? But what are you doing also to make shifts there? Because we don't have those inroads. We don't have the relationships. They're not our cousins, uncles, fathers, mothers, brothers, all that. We ain't got that kind of, you know, access. So what are you doing in those communities that are often harmful to us, and making sure that they are, you know, reducing their harm? So that's another way I think to look at what we talk about when we talk about white allies.
Thank you, Bomani. Alexandra?
Yeah, a couple of ways. One of the ways that I invite non-Black folks to join in the work that we're doing at the Imperative is to become a courageous donor. So we have two donor circles. One is called the Courageous Donor Circle, and one is called the Diaspora Innovation Circle. The Diaspora Innovation Circle is like a roll up your sleeve space for Black folks who are interested in the work that we're doing, who want more of a firsthand access to the projects that we're working on, and who want to engage more deeply. And that is a Black space, right? So we're creating space there. But we also have a courageous donor circle that's open to anyone. And what we say is that there's a lot of work to do around racial justice, around racial healing. And since we center Black people, we are focused on Black people. So we're not gonna take on the work of trying to heal others, right? We can invite others to support the work that we will do to heal ourselves. And when we are healed, others are going to get the benefit of that, right? One of the things I think traditional philanthropy wasn't putting out RFPs saying to Black folks, hey, here's some money to work on your internalized depression, right? Like we have some deep healing work to do. And so our invitation is, if you believe in the fact that Black people deserve to have wealth, health, and connectedness, if you believe in supporting the well-being of Black people, just become a courageous donor. You don't need to take up space. We don't need to talk about your feelings. Just become a courageous donor. And that is, it's a transaction, but to actually take that step, I think is a bigger step in a lot of ways, because a lot of philanthropy, they would not just give the money and back out of the way, right? Like if traditional philanthropy is gonna be like, well, we want some strings attached for these dollars. And so we say, just be a courageous donor, contribute, and let us deal with the things that we need to deal with for our communities. So that's the way that I think we invite folks who are not Black into the work that we're doing. And we give our courageous donors, we give them sessions on the projects that we're funding, right? So they get information, right? But we're not centering their feelings or what they might need outside of the work that we need to do. And then the last thing I'll say is that we have actually, there's my co-founder, Ade, he's based in Atlanta, and there's a group doing great work with white folks in Atlanta. And one of the things that they've started doing is including the imperative, like at the end of their sessions, they encourage them to make a donation, right? Mm-hmm. Like, here's an easy first step. Here's something where you don't get to have control. You just offer support to Black-led organizations that are centering the well-being of Black people, right? And so sometimes we get donations through that work. So I give that example to say of what allies are doing for us, right? As they do their own work on white folks, they still are saying, here's an easy way that you can give to a cause outside of yourself, right? And step back.
We have one more time for one more question for each of you. You'll get 2 to 3 minutes on this one. Then I'll hand it back to Summer so she can do some closing pieces. But this has been just an enlightening conversation, and I'm kind of feeling inspired to try to do more in my organization, which definitely does not necessarily center Blackness. And I think there's probably a number of people on the call who work at what I would call more traditional foundations. They may have a bunch of program areas. They may be focused on broadly equity issues or specific issue areas, whether it's education or economic development or whatever. And I guess I ask for them, but further, what advice do you have for how an individual program officer or an individual director or even an individual vice president or even president to be able to more center Blackness in their work? What advice do you have for philanthropy to make whatever shifts that have occurred over a long fought amount of time much more permanent? What advice do you have? And we'll start with you, Bomani, on this one.
I think a lot of times when we talk about philanthropy, we talk about philanthropy as it's one thing. We know it's not true. Charles, at the 97,000 foundations you worked at, If you see one foundation, you see one foundation. But I think one of the things that can go across, that is something that can be held true for everybody who seeks to try to do this work. I think it's a few things that you have to do. I think for your own, start here because that's where we're starting to center ourselves more. For your own well-being, you got to find your crew. You got to find your posse, your tribe, your whatever, your group of folks who, some of them may be at the institution where you are, or I'm sure there are going to be many that are not, who understand this field enough that you can pick up the phone and talk to about whatever. Like you can pick up like, hey, I got the opportunity to move X number of dollars. What do you think I should do with them? Or, hey, somebody at my organization just said something that was so messed up that I might throw this chair at them. So, to talk you down. Or somebody who's also just like, hey, here's this great opportunity that we have. I can't use it, but can you? So you need to you got to build your tribe. You got to build your crew, because if you don't, then, it's like I've seen so many of us at gather, when we do have opportunities to gather, where folks are isolated, and they're isolated both, geographically and then definitely philosophically in the spaces where they are. And so how do you find ways to make connection? I think that's what it is critical. The other thing is, I was raised by my dad was 45 years older than me when I was born, and he created a whole way of working in segregated Chicago growing up, from the time he was born in the 1920s until he died in 2014. And he used to tell me things around how to work in places, and the way he talked about it was learn somebody's job, learn at least one level under you and 2 levels over you, so that you would be kind of like they can't get rid of you. And I think that can translate into a lot of ways. Like you have to study your organization, you have to study the institution that you're in, to understand how it works. And then you can figure out from there, how do you make moves to make sure that Blackness is centered in the organizations that you're in. A lot of times this work sits with people, and then when the people move on, the work stops. If you have the opportunity to make things more institutional, if you can create policies that will carry over after you leave, or practices that can possibly carry over after you leave, you'd have to do that. And I think that comes from having both, things and understanding how the organization works inside, but that group, that posse that you have also includes folks who do work on the ground, who can put pressure on organizations and institutions, if by nothing else, by being loud about what they ain't doing or what they are doing that's harmful to Black folks and Black communities. So I think those are a few pieces of doing it. I think you gotta take care, Black folks, y'all gotta take care of yourselves in these spaces, because these spaces will chew you up and spit you out and be like, we had a Black and we tried it, and they will eat your ass up and they will throw you out. So make sure that you have to take care of yourself in this space, and reach out to the folks on these screens and people that to make sure that you're being taken care of.
True words have not been spoken. Alexandra?
If I could snap for that last part, Bomani, about them chewing you up and spitting you out. And I would say, for Black folks who are working in these institutions, don't be surprised. It could be, the one that looks like you chewing you up and spitting you out. So I highly encourage, don't martyr yourself for this work. Some of the things I would encourage philanthropy to do, or people who are working in the sector, if you find yourself in conversations about Black-led organizations, or projects that center Black people, and the question is, why Black? Please say, why not? Please say, why not? Why not? That is the question. That is the answer that I have found myself over and over having to say. The other thing that I want to give an example of why it's so important to say why not. I'm going to try to do it quickly. our first core project has been a Kiswahili language, culture, and exchange project that we have funded a set of organizations in Kenya. This includes University of Nairobi, the Shima Foundation, our main partner, and several other organizations. They had built a curriculum on an app and built the app as well. And the program is an exchange where the students will learn Kiswahili on the app in conversation with students in Atlanta Public Schools. Because of this project, the state of Georgia approved the Kiswahili curriculum for credit in this year. This just happened. We actually have an event coming up in Georgia next on the 8th, on September 8th to celebrate this. But the state of Georgia has approved the Kiswahili language for credit, something that was never available for credit for the entire school district across the state of Georgia. Now, not just the Black students in Atlanta who we're working with are going to have access to this, but any student can get credit now for learning the Kiswahili language. So here, this was an indigenous African language that was going away. In Kenya, they stopped teaching it after 4th grade, and then they switched to English as a language of business. So here, you know what I'm saying? Like this idea that centering Blackness will only benefit Black people, it's just simply not true. And so if you find yourself being asked why Black, please say, why not?
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. I want to thank our panelists for just words of wisdom today. Like, you know, it's a Monday. I was having trouble getting into the week, but you know, this panel has kind of made me feel like I can do a little something. And I am not feeling as old as when I started this. I just want to thank Bomani and Alexandra for their beautiful, inspiring words. Like I'm so happy to get to know them on this panel. I'm so happy to hand this back to Summer, who also did a wonderful job in organizing this. And I just want to thank the Black Funders Network for creating spaces for Black people. And Summer, you get the last minute.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you to Bomani, Alexandra, especially you, Charles, for facilitating this conversation. I want to thank you to our members, our Cornerstone supporters, our advisory board, and our guests, the people who make this possible. I know we only have 1 minute, so I'm going to put in the chat a link to our survey and ask you to share your reflections for the program, and please follow us on LinkedIn and stay tuned for our programming. It has been a great kind of kickoff to the week. I'm already energized. I'm ready to, you know, provide programming and spaces for us. That's what we're here for, and I just really appreciate you all. So that is my final remark. You can also follow up with our panelists and moderator. I will put their contact information in the chat for you all, or I'll ask them to do that. And if there aren't any more remarks, y'all have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I'll call you later, Romani.